In December of 2023, Javier Milei was elected president of Argentina. Argentina suffered from economic mismanagement for decades, with persistently high inflation and unemployment. Milei promised radical solutions to end the country's problems. He promised to drastically cut government spending and deregulate the economy. This would finally reduce inflation and eliminate distortions in the economy. For the first year and a half of Milei's presidency, his policies appeared to be working. By early 2025, inflation had fallen to a 5-year low, and the government's budget posted a surplus for the first time in 14 years. Milei's apparent success has turned him into an inspiration for right-wing political movements around the world. His trademark gimmick is to carry around a chainsaw. The chainsaw represents cutting wasteful government spending and regulations, thus allowing free market capitalism to flourish. While some of the headline macroeconomic numbers are improving, cracks are starting to show in Milei's new economy. Milei's biggest goal was to reduce inflation and thus stabilize the value of Argentina's currency. This is a chart of the Argentine peso versus the US dollar. It shows how many pesos you need to buy $1. The higher the value, the weaker the peso. For the first few months of 2025, the peso was depreciating against the dollar, but it was doing so in a slow and stable manner. But starting in April, the depreciation accelerated in an uncontrolled manner. By October of 2025, the situation was becoming desperate. Milei's government tried intervening in the foreign exchange market to support the peso, but their US dollar reserves were quickly being depleted. Milei campaigned on free market principles and reducing government regulations, yet in a desperate attempt to protect the currency, he started implementing draconian restrictions, banning Argentines from buying US dollars. With his back against the wall, Milei traveled to Washington to meet his good friend Donald Trump. He convinced Trump to give Argentina a $20 billion bailout. In this video, we'll take a deep dive into Javier Milei's economic policies, and why they have failed to solve Argentina's long-standing currency problems. For decades, Argentina's government has run large budget deficits to fund generous welfare and subsidy programs. The government has funded its deficit by borrowing large amounts of money, often from foreign lenders. Argentina's public indebtedness has resulted in multiple debt crises over the years. They've received multiple bailouts from the International Monetary Fund. Argentina currently has $42 billion of loans outstanding from the IMF, making it the IMF's largest borrower in the world. In addition to borrowing money, the Argentine central bank also prints new money. This has resulted in persistently high inflation. Milei believed that the solution to Argentina's problems is to drastically reduce public expenditures. If the government no longer runs a budget deficit, you won't need to borrow or print money anymore. Since taking office, Milei has largely followed through on his campaign promises. He cut back on many welfare programs and laid off almost 10% of public sector employees. So let's look at the numbers. This chart shows the Argentine government's revenue and expenditures since 2022. This is denominated in the local currency, the Argentine peso. The currency code for the peso is ARS. Over the past few years, revenue and expenditures have been skyrocketing. But this gives a misleading picture. Argentina has experienced massive inflation during this period. As the value of the currency decreases, the government's tax revenue and expenditure rises in nominal terms, even if there is no real change in what the government is doing. The high inflation rate has also caused the exchange rate of the peso to depreciate. At the beginning of 2022, it would cost you about 200 pesos to purchase $1 US. Today it takes over 1,400. It takes 7 times more pesos to buy $1 US. So the value of the peso has declined by 86%. Now let's look at Argentina's budget numbers denominated in US dollars. Milei took office in December of 2023. Before Milei took office, the government would spend about 30 to 35 billion US dollars per quarter, including interest expense on their outstanding debt. The government's revenue was only about $25 billion per quarter, so they incurred a deficit of about $5 to $10 billion per quarter. After taking office, Milei substantially reduced government spending. Now the government only spends about $25 billion per quarter. In the second quarter of 2025, government revenue surged to $37 billion, while expenses were $26 billion, so the government reported a budget surplus of $11 billion. Why did revenue increase so much? It's the result of an accounting technicality. The Argentine central bank holds foreign currency and gold reserves worth tens of billions of dollars. The central bank maintains a profit and loss statement that is denominated in pesos. As the peso depreciates, the value of the foreign currency reserves increases. Because the central bank's balance sheet is denominated in pesos, they technically have an unrealized profit. The government owns the central bank, so the central bank transfers its profits to the government. It doesn't transfer its foreign currency reserves to the government. It instead prints new pesos equal to its unrealized profits and transfers them to the government. The whole thing is basically a farce that allows the central bank to print money that the government can spend. This black line shows the government's revenue excluding the central bank transfers. This is the real revenue the government generates, mostly from collecting taxes. Excluding the central bank transfers, Argentina is still running a small deficit in most quarters, but the deficit is much smaller than it was before Milei took office. Things are certainly moving in the right direction. Previous Argentine governments have attempted to prop up the value of the peso. They wanted the peso to be strong so as to reduce the prices people have to pay for imported products. When you keep your currency at an artificially strong level, that increases demand for imports, while at the same time making your exports uncompetitive in the global market. Because of this, Argentina ran large trade deficits. Trying to keep your currency at an artificially strong level is ultimately an exercise in futility. Eventually, your central bank will run out of foreign currency reserves and you'll be forced to depreciate your currency anyway. When Milei took office, he instructed the central bank to devalue the peso by 50%. This caused a one-time increase in inflation as the prices of imported products rose, but the devaluation did achieve its intended purpose. In 2023, Argentina posted a trade deficit almost every month. Following the devaluation, they started making trade surpluses. Trade surpluses will help to grow Argentina's export industries and provide an influx of much-needed foreign currency. When Milei took office in December of 2023, Argentina's annualized inflation rate was 211%. Following the currency devaluation, the inflation rate went even higher, peaking at 289% in April of 2024. But it has since been on a steady downward trend. By the summer of 2025, inflation has fallen to about 30%. While this is still high by most standards, it's a huge improvement since Milei took office. With all that being said, it hasn't been all roses. When Milei took office, Argentina's unemployment rate was 5.7%. As of the second quarter of 2025, it has risen to 7.6%. The rise of unemployment is partly due to Milei laying off tens of thousands of government employees. Also, his cuts to welfare benefits and subsidies have caused discontent among the affected people. But overall, everything appeared to be going to plan. While there was some short-term pain, Milei was following through on his promises to set Argentina on a more sustainable economic trajectory. That's why it came as such a surprise when in October of 2025, the peso started collapsing. Milei had to go running to Washington to ask Trump for a bailout. So what happened? To understand Argentina's current problems, we must understand how the country has historically managed its currency. We must first understand the difference between a free-floating currency and a controlled currency. The British pound sterling is an example of a free-floating currency. The Bank of England does not attempt to directly control the value of the pound. It moves up and down based on supply and demand. If you look at the chart of the exchange rate between the pound and the US dollar, it looks pretty much random. Argentina has a controlled exchange rate. The Argentine central bank controls the official exchange rate directly. All else equal, the Argentine government always wants the peso to be as strong as possible. But as they print more pesos, they eventually have to depreciate the exchange rate, otherwise they'll run out of foreign currency reserves. In the second half of 2023, immediately before Milei took office, the peso stopped depreciating. It stayed constant for a few months at an exchange rate of about 350 pesos per US dollar. When Milei took office, he depreciated the exchange rate by more than 50%, bringing it to 800 pesos per US dollar. The previous government kept the official exchange rate at an artificially strong level. So what exactly are the implications of this? Let's say you have a shopping mall in Argentina. You want to import foreign products to sell in your shop. To pay for foreign products, you need to exchange your pesos for foreign currency. So you go to a bank. The bank will exchange your pesos into foreign currency at the official exchange rate. Let's say you want to import a Ford Explorer from the US. The Ford Explorer costs $40,000. The official exchange rate is artificially strong. Before Milei took office, it was about twice as strong as it should have been. So that $40,000 Ford Explorer effectively only costs you $20,000 to import. That sounds great, but there is no free lunch. Who's paying for this discount? It's effectively paid for by the central bank. The commercial banks in Argentina get their foreign currency from the central bank. The central bank gives them this currency at the artificially strong official exchange rate. Because the official exchange rate is so favorable, everybody in Argentina wants to buy imported products. The central bank will quickly run out of US dollar reserves. To prevent this, the central bank limits how much foreign currency people are allowed to buy. This creates a situation where there is a shortage of imported products, but the few foreign products that are imported are sold at artificially cheap prices. Argentine citizens are also restricted in how much foreign currency they can buy. They can only purchase at most $200 US per month. These restrictions are designed to prevent the central bank from running out of US dollar reserves. This resulted in a large black market for foreign exchange. People smuggle in US dollars to sell them for exchange rates far weaker than the official exchange rate. People are willing to pay higher prices for US dollars on the black market because they're only allowed to buy a very small number of US dollars at the official exchange rate. There are two parallel exchange rates for the Argentine peso. There's the official exchange rate that is directly controlled by the central bank. Then there's the market rate. This is the rate that international currency traders pay on the international FX markets. In November of 2023, immediately prior to Milei taking office, the official exchange rate was 350 pesos per US dollar. On the international markets, the peso was much weaker at 700 pesos per US dollar. Milei devalued the international exchange rate slightly to 800 pesos per dollar. At the same time, he massively devalued the official exchange rate also to 800 pesos per dollar. Thus, the official exchange rate became in line with the international exchange rate. The central bank directly controls the official exchange rate. They just say what it is, and that's what it is. The central bank does not directly control the international exchange rate, but they can influence it. If they want the peso to strengthen, they purchase pesos on the international market using their US dollar reserves, and vice versa. Throughout 2024 and the early part of 2025, Argentina's inflation rate was declining but was still very high. So they had to continuously devalue the peso so as to not run out of US dollar reserves. Milei has long criticized previous governments for keeping the peso at an artificially strong level. But even he understood that devaluing the peso too quickly would cause economic hardship, as the prices of imported products increases for Argentine consumers. He wanted the peso to depreciate as slowly as possible while he waited for his other economic reforms to bear fruit. By April of 2025, Argentina's financial situation was again precarious. Milei wasn't depreciating the currency fast enough, and the central bank was running low on US dollars, so Argentina went to the IMF for yet another bailout. On April 11, 2025, the IMF approved a $20 billion bailout for Argentina. This is the country's fifth IMF bailout since 2000, although technically it's an extension of a previous bailout. This $20 billion loan will mature in 2027. When the IMF extends a loan, they typically create conditions that the recipient country must follow. In the case of Argentina, a lot of their past problems stem from their controlled exchange rate. As a condition for this loan, the IMF requires that Argentina gradually transition to a floating exchange rate. The transition will happen gradually. Instead of keeping the exchange rate at a fixed level, Argentina must allow the currency to float freely within a certain range. The central bank is only allowed to intervene in the international FX market if the exchange rate goes beyond these bounds. The balance will widen over time such that Argentina eventually moves to a fully floating exchange rate. Milei's economic reforms have been very unpopular with certain segments of the population. Unemployment has risen due to his massive layoffs of public sector employees. He has also drastically cut certain welfare programs, which has pushed many people into poverty. In August of 2025, Milei was forced to leave a public event early after protesters threw rocks at him. In September, Buenos Aires, which is Argentina's largest province, held provincial elections. The candidate from the left-wing opposition party won the election with 47% of the vote. The candidate from Milei's Libertarian Party was far behind at just 37%. Milei's presidential term ends in 2027. In light of his party's poor performance in the recent Buenos Aires election, many people now fear that he will lose the upcoming presidential election. If he loses, he's likely to be replaced by a left-wing president who will start running massive budget deficits and take the country back to hyperinflation. Milei faces a bit of a conundrum. If he devalues the peso too slowly, the central bank may run out of US dollar reserves. If he devalues the peso too quickly, the inflationary shock will hit Argentinians very hard. This will decrease his popularity and he risks losing re-election. Following the unfavorable election result in Buenos Aires, foreign investors started selling their Argentinian financial assets. This resulted in a sharp depreciation of the currency. The peso hit the upper end of the range that they're trying to keep within. The government started selling US dollars in an attempt to support the currency, but their reserves were being quickly depleted. With nowhere else to turn, Milei went to Washington to meet with Donald Trump. Milei and Trump have long been political allies, with both publicly supporting each other. On October 9th, the US agreed to give a bailout to Argentina. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent made the following announcement on Twitter. Argentina faces a moment of acute illiquidity. Only the United States can act swiftly. And act we will. To that end, today we directly purchased Argentine pesos. Additionally, we have finalized a $20 billion currency swap framework with Argentina's central bank. The US Treasury is prepared immediately to take whatever exceptional measures are warranted to provide stability to the markets. Following the news of the US bailout, the value of the peso has stabilized. As of the time of recording this video on October 12th, the peso sits at 1,421, which is slightly below the upper bound of 1,490. While the prospect of a currency crisis has been averted in the short term, a $20 billion loan is only a temporary solution. The main problem with Argentina is that it is a democracy. Milei's economic policies are working. Inflation is coming down and the government's budget is in better shape than it's been in decades. This inevitably caused backlash from people who had their welfare benefits and pensions cut. Milei needs to convince his people that the short-term pain is worth the long-term gain. If he loses the next election, all the progress he made is likely to be reversed. Alright guys, that wraps it up for this video. What do you think about Javier Milei? Was it right for Trump to bail him out with $20 billion? Let us know in the comments section below. As always, thank you so much for watching and we'll see you in the next one. Wall Street Millennial, signing out.